Okay, so now we're going to move on in our discussion about market demand and supply. So where have we been? We have talked about the demand and the supply curve. We've talked about market efficiency, and market efficiency occurs where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. We've talked about consumer surplus and producer surplus, and we've touched on market inefficiencies created by price ceilings and price floors. We're going to continue this discussion, and to do this, I am going to give you a primer on elasticity. I've broken elasticity into two segments. The second part of elasticity, which has to do with pricing and the total revenue curve and a little bit more of the calculations, we will see later on in the course. But for now, we are going to go over the general shapes of curves when they are more elastic and when they are inelastic. We are going to talk about the effect of taxes on market efficiency, and we're going to talk about tax incidence. Tax incidence means who pays the tax. And then we're going to talk about externalities, both positive and negative externalities. So externalities are positive benefits or costs associated with certain activities that may not be captured in the actual demand or the supply curve. Okay, let's start first with a primer on elasticity. Elasticity is a measurement of responsiveness in quantity demanded or quantity supplied based on a change in price, and this is measured in percentage terms. So more formally, the definition of elasticity is elasticity measures a percentage change in the quantity demanded or the quantity supplied when price changes by 1%. For now, I'm going to give you some relative shapes of demand curves that go from different extremes, and we're going to talk about their elasticity. So on one end of the spectrum, we have a demand curve that we say is very elastic. And what this means is that if the price changes just a little bit, the quantity demanded is going to be infinite. There's another type of demand curve on the other extreme, which is inelastic. And inelastic demand curves we see mostly with medicines. Perhaps you have to take a dose of medicine every day. You can't take less than that dose. You can't take more than that dose. So for you, your demand for that particular medicine is inelastic. That means that, say the dose is $10 and you need one dose per day. If the price were to go up to $50, you would still only need one dose per day. Okay. If the price were to go down to $5, you would still only need one dose per day. Okay. So this type of demand curve we say is perfectly inelastic. Compared to this demand curve that we say is perfectly elastic. And then we have a middle range that we say is unit elastic. So I will put the unit elastic demand curve right here. And what this means is that if the price were to change by 1%, the quantity demanded would change by 1%. If the price were to change by 10%, the quantity demanded would change by 10%. And those types of demand curves tend to look like this. Okay, So this would be a unit elastic demand curve. And with unit elasticity, there's a one-to-one relationship, okay? Now, the word unit means that the elasticity is equal to 1. Okay, so elasticity is equal to 1. Like I said, we will calculate these out later on. So these are the 3 main types of elastic curves. And then I mentioned that we were going to do 5, so we have 2 more to cover. There are some things that will affect the shape of the curve and whether or not it's elastic or inelastic. The more a product is a necessity, like food or medicine, or if we have an addiction, like to a certain illegal drug, the elasticity of that product tends to be inelastic. In other words, we don't care how much it costs, we need it, okay? So necessities tend to be inelastic. Luxury items, on the other hand, tend to be elastic. So Ferraris, Mercedes, exotic vacations are luxury items, and those are very responsive to changes in prices. If the price goes up, maybe you won't go on that luxury trip because after all, it was just optional. And there are substitutes. There are other places that you can go. Okay, so when an item is a luxury and perhaps there are other substitutes, that product is going to be elastic. Okay, so luxury items, it has to be products for which there is a substitute. Okay. You have an elastic demand. Items that are a necessity, these tend to have an inelastic demand, and there are few substitutes. So this comes into play as well when we start talking about taxation. When we look at the supply curve, we're looking at 5 different shapes of the supply curve as well. We have at one extreme inelastic supply, which is a vertical line. So examples of an inelastic supply would be seats at a football stadium. Why are NFL tickets so expensive? Because there's only a certain number of seats at each football stadium. Perhaps number of seats at a theater. That would be an inelastic supply. They can't provide more than the number of seats that are there. On the other extreme, we have perfectly elastic supply. And what this means is that a little nudge in the price downward or upward will result in, that should be a supply, will result in an infinite amount of supply being provided. So at this price point, supply is infinite. Compare that to this one, where if the price to a football game is $100 and you are willing to pay $1,000, it won't really matter. The number of seats that are provided are given by the number of seats at the stadium. Okay, so we have those 2 extremes. Then, as in the demand curve, we have unit elastic, where a 1% change in price leads to a 1% change in the quantity demanded. Okay, so we have an increase in price. This increase in price results in the same change in terms of quantity demanded. Then we have elastic supply, and that's where our elasticity is greater than 1. This means a 1% change in price gives us a greater than 1% change in the quantity supplied. supply curve that you need to take in mind. Now, things that can influence supply are things like the production possibilities. What is the production possibilities of sellers into the market? The other thing that will change is time. How much time has passed? In the case of the football stadium, if they decide to expand capacity, then they can expand maybe to 150,000 seats. But in the long run, but that would be a long run proposition, not a short run proposition. Another thing that might affect is the ability to store certain goods and services. Maybe if these products are storable, then they can be released and increase the elasticity of supply.